To EPA's webinar. Today we're going to be covering the topic of applying new technologies to help the states reach and regulate their non-community water systems. My name is Steve Hoagie. I'm with the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water with EPA. I also have here with me Adrian Harris, my colleague, and Jessica Sokolow from Cadmus Group is helping to run the logistics on the webinar. So we have a very ambitious agenda today with some excellent speakers. We think that the information that you hear today, we hope that it will spark ideas for you about how you might be able to apply some of the concepts and things that you hear today, how you might be able to use those things in your own state. So next slide, please. First, we'll start out with just a few logistics. We've sent a copy of the slides for today's webinar to all those who had registered by this morning. So please check your email, and if you have not received it or if you registered later than this morning, just send a message to us using the question box. And you can see on this diagram here on the slide, there's a question box, and basically it's a chat box. You would just click on this box. You may have to open up the plus sign to open up the box. Just type in your message and click send. And you'll use that box to send anything to us in terms of any questions that you have during the webinar for the speakers, as well as if you do need a copy of the presentation, just send us a chat message and we'll make sure that we send that out to you. We do encourage you to ask questions of the speakers at any time during our session today. And we'll be monitoring those questions, and at the end of each presentation, we'll spend just a few minutes to have a question and answer period, and we'll just read the questions at that time. And also, if you run into any problems during the broadcast, such as the screen not showing or poor audio quality, feel free to call the GoToWebinar technical support number, the toll-free number that you see on the screen. Just choose selection 2 in order to be connected to someone who can help you. The last thing that I wanted to note is that we've muted all your phone lines in order to maintain the best sound quality. So in order to communicate with us, just use the question box to send us a chat message. So next slide, please. Today's webinar is the third in a series of webinars addressing topics that are of interest to state drinking water regulatory personnel who are responsible for regulating non-community water systems. In the first webinar that we held last May, we introduced the findings of our state and EPA non-community work group, and we highlighted some best practices of the states of Maine and Ohio. In the second webinar that was last August, we focused on ways to get non-community systems to be ready to comply with the new requirements of the revised total coliform rule. And in that webinar, we featured presentations by several states, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, and Utah, as well as the presentation by EPA's RTCR rule manager. Okay, next slide, please. So these webinars were recorded and they're posted on the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators website at the address that's shown on the bottom right of the screen that you see. Today's webinar is also being recorded and it'll be available at the same location. So we hope that you'll tell your colleagues who weren't able to attend the webinars and let them know where they can find those programs. And also today's program will be there. So next slide, please. For today's presentations, we'll first have Curtis Stoehr from Idaho. From Idaho. He will describe his state's auto dialer program that sends monitoring reminder notices to their water systems. If we have time, Curtis will also mention the Public Water System Switchboard website that was set up by the state, which has a lot of practical resources for water system personnel. Colt Smith of Utah's Division of Drinking Water will give us an overview of how Utah is using Google Forms to facilitate the collection of information on their water systems in a state database. And he'll be followed by Steve Wilson of the University of Illinois, who will describe his private well owner class and website. He'll show us the information and resources that he's compiled and how they can be of assistance to non-community water system or water system operators. And finally, Vern Steel of the Rural Water Association of Utah will explain how his field staff is using a mobile app to collect information on water systems in the field and then transmit that information in the form of a report to state regulators. Some commercial products and services will be mentioned during today's webcast, and we want to point out that we're featuring these products only as an example of the types of tools that are available to states. EPA has not officially endorsed any of these particular products or services that are being described today. So we'll have, as I mentioned before, following each presentation, we'll have a 5-minute question and answer session. So we encourage you to submit your questions for each of the speakers at any time during their presentation by using the question box that we talked about earlier. So let's get started. Next slide, please. So today's first speaker is Curtis Stoehr of Idaho's Department of Environmental Quality. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Health from Boise State University, and he's worked for the Idaho DEQ for the past 14 years, where he's been a drinking water inspector. He's also been the CIDWIS coordinator, and currently he's the Capacity Development Coordinator. So thank you, Curtis, for joining us today.
Very good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let me give you a little bit of background about how Idaho runs their drinking water program. Idaho is a decentralized program that is implemented through 13 field offices. We rely on these field offices to determine compliance on CIDWIS data. When we started evaluating some of our compliance data, it was identified that one of our regions, our Pocatello office, had significantly better compliance rates than any other region. And so what I ended up doing is I called Barb Jones in our regional office, and I asked her, what are you doing to get these, compliance rates that are, so good? And what are you doing that other regions aren't doing? And she stated that she calls every one of her systems at the end of a monitoring period to ensure that they have conducted their sampling that they needed to, and so that she gets sample results. And if she doesn't have the results, she gives them a call. Calling the public water systems was a very effective way at reducing her failure to monitor violations that she'd have to deal with. But it was very labor intensive for her to call each one of these systems to ensure that these samples were delivered to her. But on the other hand, if she didn't call those systems and the system did get a violation, it ended up producing even more work. She would end up having to send the system a violation letter, track the public notification schedule in CIDWIS. The system's ETT score increased. She had to do data entry into our data tracking system that we call TRIM, and possibly have additional enforcement down the road with this system because of these violations. So each of these violations really create a storm of activity down the road that can actually be more labor intensive than just doing what she was doing, was calling these systems to avoid those violations from being produced. So what I did was I took this information back to my supervisor, and we realized that we could not expect each of our staff to call all of these delinquent systems and make sure that they sampled. It just wasn't realistic. Barb was doing really above and beyond what needed to be done, or what was expected, and we couldn't expect all of our other staff to do this as well. So I took this information back to my supervisor, and he said, you know what, let's buy an auto dialer. And I kind of looked at him funny, and I said, can we do that? He said, I don't know, why not? So what he did was he ended up running that idea up the chain, and 2 weeks later, he delivers a box to me that contained an auto dialer. The box is about the size of a shoe box, and he said, here you go, here's your auto dialer, make it work. And off he went. So I was stuck with this project of making the auto dialer work. And so what I ended up doing was I went to our IT staff and set up the auto dialer so that we had phone lines coming into it. We had 2 lines, and set it up so that it would deliver emails. And we modified an existing application that we already had, which was our monitoring schedule report, to identify those systems, because in that report we have a column that identifies satisfied yes or no. And what we did was just said, anybody that has a no in that column, let's go ahead and generate an auto dialer application that can produce a call list. Next slide, please. And so that was the overview I just gave you. Next slide. And so what we ended up building was an auto dialer application. This happens to be our internal switchboard that you're looking at now. It's got information regarding rules, and this is what our inspectors use internally to essentially provide them all the information that they might need to do their day-to-day work. It's got rules, it's got applications that we've built, it's got training that we've built or found beneficial to our inspectors. It's got reports and forms that they might use. It's got SIDWIS, you can see on that right-hand column, the SIDWIS application that they can enter or open from there. We've got a development copy of SIDWIS that they can test data entry into. We've got our SIDWIS procedure documents that tell them how to do the data entry. So it really kind of is a one-stop shop for these systems to be able to do their daily work. If we were to then click on the auto dialer button, go ahead, next slide. This is the application that we built internally to provide the auto dialer call list. You would select the report type. We have seasonal or normal. For seasonal systems, it's those systems that close early, that we want to make sure that we are providing them a call saying you're going to be closed in September. Make sure that you get your annual samples done early. So we've got the ability to call those systems. So we've identified those as seasonal systems. Then you would identify your notification type. You do chemicals, lead and copper, TCR we do quarterly, and unaddressed significant deficiencies, and public notifications. These are all different calls that we can make to ensure that those compliance issues are addressed. We then identify the quarter in which we are going to be calling the system. And we do jurisdiction, which defaults to all of our 13 jurisdictions, and a contact type defaults to sampler. In SIDWIS, we require that all systems have at least one sampler, and the sampler is who gets called as our auto dialer call. You can have more than one if you want, but you have to have at least one. And with each one of those systems, you need to have a phone number, and we try to get as many emails as possible. And we understand that some operators may not have that, but at least we have a phone number. If we click Get Report, next slide, please. What we get here is this happens to be the total coliform samples, quarterly samples, happens to be the third quarter of 2014, and we've got 599 systems at that time that hadn't completed or we didn't have sample results for them during that third quarter. So we wanted to generate a list of those systems that we didn't have. This is the list that's generated. It's got all of the information that we're going to need to populate our message template. Next slide, please. What we do to take that CSV file is we go into the application. You click on the phone tree link on my desktop. It then opens up the application. We click on the phone tree that we want. This one happens to be a failure to monitor message that we're going to send out. And we click Import at the top of the page that comes open. We then import that data into the application and into the software, and then we click on Wizard. Next slide, please. The call wizard is going to assist us in starting a call. What we would then click on is the first button here, which tells you we're going to do both a phone call and an email. And then click Next. And the wizard's going to ask you to confirm that you wish to start a call. You're going to click Yes, and this slide shows that we're going to call, this was for a test, we're going to call Tim Wendland. And this shows how many lines we have. Currently, we've got 4 lines set up to our auto dialer. And with those 4 lines, we can actually make 110 calls per hour with those 4 lines. Next slide, please. And what you're seeing here is the email that is sent out to the public water system. If they've got got an email address in that CSV file. And the phone message that they're going to get is, go ahead and click on the speaker, and we will listen to the message that they receive.
This message is from the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality State Office. For Tim Wendland, you are receiving this call because you are listed as the sampler for Paradise Subdivision Public Water System. As of today, our records indicate we have not received a total coliform sample results for your approved sampling locations. The monitoring period end date for the sample period is September 30th, 2014. Press 1 on your touch-tone phone at any time if you have already sampled for this analyte. If you have not yet sampled for total coliform for your approved sampling locations, please do so right away to avoid having Paradise Subdivision accrue a drinking water violation, which will require both public notification to all of your customers, as well as the completion of required sampling. Your drinking water monitoring requirements and results can be found online at the Drinking Water Switchboard on the DEQ website. You will also receive this message as an email if we have an email address for you. If you have questions about the automated call, please speak with your drinking water contact person at DEQ State Office. If you would like to listen to this message again, press star now.
All right, so that's the call that we send out. And to be honest, the first time that we sent this out in 2010, the public water systems kind of freaked out. They were like, what is this? You know, what's going on? But once they identified that it was a reminder call, there were so many emails that we got back and said, oh my gosh, I forget that I only need to sample for nitrites every 9 years, and I would have forgotten this. You know, I forget to do this every 9 years. And so we started actually getting quite a few emails back saying, thank you, I would have forgotten to take this sample, and this is, you know, a great system that you guys have implemented. Next slide, please. And through the use of the auto dialer, we've actually made over 15,000 calls so far since we started this in 2010. And in general, the public have really appreciated the friendly reminder. And what we've seen as a result of this is a 47% reduction in our failure to monitor violations, which is huge. To try to quantify that into how much time that has saved our regional staff, you know, that's hard to do. But our regional staff, you know, we've asked them, do you want to continue this process? Is it working for you? And yeah, they're huge advocates for this new process that we've implemented. And we just started doing public notification just this week, actually. And so that's a new one that for us, significant deficiencies we started doing probably about 2 years ago. And so we're just slowly adding additional calls as time progresses. But yeah, public notification, we were identifying, you know, where's our biggest problem, and public notification, which wasn't part of our auto dialer calling system, was identified as our biggest issue for violations. And so now that we've implemented that, we're hoping to see the same reduction in failure to notify on those as well. So next slide, please. I guess we can take questions now regarding the auto dialer. And if you want to send me an email, I'd be glad to send you information that I have regarding our auto dialer system, and I can send you our actual Word document that identifies what our messages contain, all the verbiage, so that you don't have to recreate the wheel, or at least you'll have a starting point for which to start from. So
great. Yeah, thank you so much, Curtis. You're getting a lot of questions here, and as you might expect, the number one question here is, how much did it cost? And just how does it work out in terms of, you know, capital cost, extra lines, cost per call, all that sort of thing? Would that be in the information that you can send out to people?
I can just tell you right now, I
okay.
want to say that the auto dialer, the software and the router that comes with it, I think we bought initially the 2-line router, and now we've got actually 2 routers that you put 2 lines into, and I think we've got about $3,000 into it total.
Okay.
So
and yeah, the question also is in terms of any extra, you know, tech support, software costs, all those kinds of things in setting it up.
I would say that the biggest piece is generating the CSV. If you've got the ability to generate the CSV of failure to monitors, who's going to fail to monitor, that is the biggest hurdle that most systems or most states are going to have. As far as the software and uploading that and getting it in place, it wasn't that difficult. I've got a procedure document that I actually built internally so that if I get hit by the bus, that somebody could pick up the pieces after I've left. But I have to manipulate that CSV file a little bit to get rid of some duplicates and make sure that it's a clean file. We actually send that file out to our regions for their review, so there's no surprises on their end of who's going to be called. That way they can say, this system is under a consent order. Let's not call them. I just take them off the list. So it's really easy to manipulate that list and who's going to get the call. So it's
okay.
Not too bad.
One of the questions was, is this going to work with SIDWIS Prime? I don't know if you can answer that question.
I'd like to see him actually build the ability to generate an Excel or CSV file from the failure to monitor reports that we get that we can currently look at. And that's essentially how I tested it. I ran the same reports that we have in SIDWIS for failure to monitors and made sure that my list was generating the same thing that SIDWIS was generating. I would just like to be able to take what comes out of SIDWIS and push that to a CSV file, but I wasn't able to do that, so we had to build our own internally, but that would be nice.
Okay. And then somebody asked you, who created the software for Idaho? I mean, was that you, basically, or were there others helping out with that?
Yeah, it was myself and IT downstairs. I helped build what we call our monitoring schedule report, and so I knew that we had the ability to identify those systems that hadn't sampled, and it was just a matter of manipulating those same queries to generate a list of systems that hadn't sampled yet.
Somebody's asking here if you're willing to share the Switchboard query code with other states.
We can send you what we have. We'd be glad to share it. The problem, you're going to have to manipulate some of the fields in there. As far as jurisdiction, you obviously aren't going to have the same jurisdictions that we have. So there might be some, massaging of that to get it to fit for your state. But yeah, we'd be glad to, package that up and send you what we've got.
Okay, so we'll send you the name of the person who was asking, and we can put you in direct contact with them. Just to wrap it up here, there are a lot of questions, but we'll have time for maybe one more. And this is kind of like combining several questions, but they're asking that, after you've been using the robodialer for a while, have you seen kind of a reduction in effectiveness, people ignoring the robocalls over time? Somewhat related to that is the question of whether people listen to the whole, can you tell or track whether people listen to the entire message or not? And can you, do multiple reminders in one call, for example?
You can track the response. It's got a report that the autodialer, you can generate from the autodialer to identify whether the person who was called picked up the phone, whether it was accepted by an answering machine. So it gives you fairly specific information as to how many times that system or that person was called. If they clicked pound to listen to the message again, it'll tell you how many times they listened to the message again. So there's a fairly robust feedback as to, you can also from the speakers on my phone, I can actually sit there and listen to the calls as they're going out, and listen to whether people hang up halfway through. But we've got about 75% of the systems or samplers that we've identified who receive the message. 75% of them have an email address. So a lot of times when they receive that call, they know they're going to get the email also, and so they just hang up on the call. And so for me,
I'm sorry.
If we could, I would love to drop the phone calls altogether and just send out the email reminders. If we could have an email for every system, that to me would be the best. And then if the email doesn't go out, I get an email saying that it's a bad email address. So it really keeps our CIDWS data fresh as far as email addresses to make sure that they're correct email addresses. So that's a very, a big benefit to us as well.
And in terms of your compliance rates, has that remained pretty steady? I mean, you said that you had a 47% reduction in the non-compliance. Is that held true for a while?
Yes, actually, we tried to compare apples to apples. We compared 2010 data to 2013 data just because you've got a 3-year cycle, and we wanted to make sure that we were hitting the same cycle to where they had essentially the same monitoring schedules that were going to be due again during that 3-year period. And the first time we did an evaluation, we had the 47% reduction, and when I did another evaluation, we had a 57% reduction 3 years later after that. So it's actually improved.
Good, good, good. Well, like I say, there are many more questions, and if we have time at the end, we'll bring those up. But Curtis, thank you so much. Definitely a lot of interest in what you had to say here, so thank you very much. So next we'll have Colt Smith, who is with the Utah Division of Drinking Water. Actually, Colt was in on our last webinar and kind of introduced this topic, but he's moved a little bit further with it in terms of further applications of Google Forms. So Colt will describe how his state is using Google Forms to collect and store information on Level 1 assessments under the revised total coliform rule. Colt has been with the Utah Department of Environmental Quality for 5 years, and he's worked in the Division of Drinking Water, and in that capacity he's coordinated several new technology initiatives, as well as the Consumer Confidence Rule and the Nitrate Rule, as well as electronic data transmission. So Colt, thank you for being here.
Yep. Hi, welcome everybody. Like Steve said, I presented in the last webinar on this topic, and this time I'm just going to kind of go in depth into something I hinted at in the last one about using it for level 1 assessments in conjunction with the revised total coliform rule. Some of the reasons why Google Forms works for the state of Utah and it might not work for every state is that about 2 years ago, the state of Utah shifted its entire email platform to using Google for our Gmail, and we also have access to Google Docs, and everyone in the state has that. So our entire staff has at least a basic understanding of the Google product suite. When this came about, we initially started using Google Forms to sort of poll operators and rural water personnel about issues and kind of getting feedback on our sanitary surveys. And then we moved it into using it to capture data for significant deficiency corrections and the lead and copper certification rule. And it's been really successful in that. It's really simple to use. It didn't take a lot of time, but those were also very simple questionnaires. The level 1 assessment is a much more complicated process to go through. And so this one has taken a lot more time, but in the end, I think it'll pay off really well. One of the reasons that it also worked for Utah is that because the state had already shifted to using the Google product suite en masse, we didn't need to put any financial investment up on our part beyond the time of the staff time to develop the forms and then maintain them. I know Google does offer sort of varied pricing plans and different things for what you're going to use if you need more storage space, but it's a free product that's done through the normal Google Suite for anyone who has a Gmail account. All you're seeing here is the first page of a level 1 assessment. So an operator would log in after they were doing their level 1 assessment and put in the basics. And the nice thing about this is that it kind of walks them through it. You put in the date of your TCR positive or whatever the sample positive was. You put in your system name. You put in your system number. There's a little prompt there to indicate the format. And then it goes through and it kind of does the basic questions. Did you evaluate your sample site protocol? Did you assess your sample protocol? What days and month did you do that? Have you had any of the following occurred at a relevant facility prior to the collection of the total coliform sample? And it runs through the list that were provided in the guidance document for the revised total coliform rule. And it runs through an entire list that will assess what they've done and what they haven't done. And then based on the answers to this page, it will move them through and give them the appropriate following pages. So if we can get the next slide. So on this system, we're going to go ahead and assume that there was an issue with the distribution system. And they did their assessment there, and then it allows them to select all issues that apply, and another that will populate and give them a text option. And then it basically mirrors, like I said, the guidance document on an example of what it would look like through EPA's, the document on the RTCR. They can describe the issue and describe the correction actions taken. And then they have the date to put in for the corrective actions were taken. Next slide. The submission page. This is the ultimate page before it goes in, and it's one that we've used on a couple others where they're submitting the document, or submitting the data to us. Is that it just has them put their name in, the title and affiliation, then we have the option of certifying that the above information is correct. We've gone ahead and counted this as being valid and allowing as a, sort of trusting the operator or the person conducting it against that. And in most cases, we don't have a lot of recourse to feel that they're lying, or if we find out that they've falsified data, then it can come under their operator certification, can come under review, and we can initiate from there. But we've never had an issue with that in any of the other virtual submissions that we've had. So we don't require a hard copy or a signature to certify that they've done it. We go ahead and count this as submitting that. Next slide. So once Google is done collecting all of this data, it populates it into a spreadsheet. It'll go through it, it'll fill out each of the individual forms, and this becomes important later for the next step and what we plan on doing with this in the future. It'll just give it out to us nice. It's put in a cloud-based environment. Everybody in the staff can have access to it, or you can control which members of your staff can go in and look and review it, who's going to be doing data entry if you're doing hand data entry into CIDWIS or whatever database you're using, or we can use this as a pretty accurate means of tracking. We can use it there. It shows who's made changes, when the dates are entered, and it timestamps everything, which is particularly nice. Next slide. Google Docs allows you to download this into a bunch of different formats. You can see here, you can download it as an Excel document, PDF, or a CSV file. The CSV is really attractive to us because we think that we can, once this has a place to be housed in CIDWIS, we can manipulate that CSV for easier migration. Now, the state of Utah, we have staff that regularly manipulate CSV files for sample data that's submitted to us from different labs. We have labs that submit us electronic data in Excel that we then go in and manipulate there. So we have the staff that's pretty expertise in troubleshooting these. There's going to be a lot initially, especially simple errors like the system. I use the example of Park City. Well, maybe the name of the system instead of says Park City Water System or Park City Public Water. Well, that's going to throw out an error, and it's going to require some troubleshooting. And we'll probably end up reviewing whether or not the troubleshooting takes more time than the hand entry. But for now, we're hopeful that when this comes down, we can move it into a CSV and text document, an Excel document, that we can manipulate that for easier migration into CIDWIS. Okay, my final slide. Any questions, you can feel free to contact me or ask here. Like I said, this is still in the early stages for us. We haven't deployed the level 1 assessment. We have used it really successfully with the lead and copper certification form, and the seasonal startup form is the other one that's been really, really popular as part of the for tracking this and being able to keep it housed in one place. It's a nice way for us to cut down on paper. It's a nice way to cut down on time for the operators and to walk them through. It provides a nice prompt of what they should be looking for and some suggested ideas. The next step in development for this will be having it met with some of our former operators to sort of look at the language and help providing prompts as to what they would look at. So in the slide that showed the distribution system and talking about pressure, did they do this, did they do that, and helping this become a troubleshooting tool as well as a recording and storage tool for the level 1 assessment. Any questions?
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Colt. We do have. I guess we'll have to kind of mute back and forth here to avoid the feedback. But one question that several people are asking, what they pointed out is in terms of meeting CROMER requirements or EPA requirements for who submits the data. Is there some way of an electronic signature or some other verification being part of this for those who are entering the information?
There's ways we've looked at for electronic signature, but for the most part, we'll probably be matching it up with the sampler and the operator who's doing it and making sure they're affiliated with the system. That'll probably be done manually on our part for verification. There are electronic signature options, but we've gone ahead and counted the yes, I certify, and the inserting your name here and putting a writer on that says, by submitting this, I submit that all information is true. I think when we ran it by our Attorney General's office, they said that they accepted that in the past and that it'll work for us at this point. Okay.
I have some of my colleagues here, and they will look into, from the EPA perspective or whatever, what conditions need to be met or whatever, and then we'll try to get that information out. Since I guess we haven't really encountered this yet, so we need to take a look at it. But some other questions here relate to, do all systems have to use the electronic form to submit their information, or are there other ways they can submit the information to you?
Right now, the only way we have to convey it is the electronic form, so we'd like to gently encourage all systems to do it electronically. We inevitably get some pushback from some of our systems who still hate technology and refuse to use it, and then we'll probably have to provide some paper PDF that they can print out and mail in. But we're going to do our best to discourage that.
Okay, so have you had any issues with operators not having a computer available? Do you have any sense as to whether a lot of systems are going to have that issue?
I doubt it. Most systems have a computer, at least one capable of accessing Google. We've had a few systems refuse, not that they don't have access to, but very small rural systems where the operator doesn't trust electronic transmission. And so that's been the only issue I think we've had. One or two operators in the past with their electronic submission. So they just simply don't trust electronic data to get there, and they'd rather mail it in by hard copy. But we haven't ever had anyone say, I don't have a computer to this point.
Okay. Somewhat related to that is, are there any security issues using cloud-based storage?
None that we've developed. Since we're all theoretically moving to Prime and cloud-based storage, we should probably get over a little bit of our fear of cloud-based technology. Google, when it came in and became verified as part of the state system, had to go through a big security check with us. It had to surpass not only all of the state's protocols for security and firewall protections, but also the federal government's, not just EPA's, but the more stringent IRS ones and Department of Health ones that house very sensitive data, extremely sensitive personal data, a lot of it billing data and credit card information, highly sensitive data. And Google met all of those conditions for us and has moved forward, and we feel are as strong as that. And part of the reason that the state moved to Google was that it was felt that it was more secure than housing it internally. Utah was subject of a huge data breach a few years ago through the Department of Health, where several thousand Medicaid records were hacked and downloaded. That prompted a whole security review, an audit of security procedures in the state, and one of the resulting options for that was moving to Google and cloud-based technology because it was more secure.
Okay, Colt, I just have one final question here, and someone remarked that it appeared that there are only about 10 to 20 questions on the Google form. Is that the case, or is it just that those are the screenshots that you just shared to give us a sample of what it looks like?
Those are the examples. There's a lot more questions, but if we went through each of them, it would have been a much longer presentation than the time I had allotted. So it actually will populate smartly based on the initial page's response. And it goes a little bit deeper than that, even on the front page. That was just the first screenshot to show you an example of it. But yes, it's a much more in-depth process than the screenshots showed.
I was not very generous in terms of how much time I allotted to the speakers, so this, by design, this webinar is just kind of an introduction or kind of a sampling, just touching on these different kinds of technologies. So I think you can contact each of these speakers if you want to find out more information and get into it a little bit deeper. So thank you so much, Colt. I really appreciate your sharing with us. And our next speaker is Steve Wilson, who is joined by his colleagues from the University of Illinois. Steve is a groundwater hydrologist who has been at the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois since 1983. He manages smallwatersupply.org, which I think a lot of you may be familiar with. It provides free resources and support for small water and wastewater system operators. And he's also in charge of the privatewellclass.org, which is the free online class for private well owners and very small water systems. And I know a number of you have mentioned that that information was very useful for also dealing with non-community water systems. So Steve, thank you for being with us.
Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you now.
All right, great. Yeah, I wanted to mention Cassia Smith and Jennifer Wilson, both who here at the U of I are working on this project as well. And the private well class is meant for private well owners, but it's very relevant. Also for non-community systems, and that's why I believe I'm on the call today. Next slide. As I mentioned, most non-community systems end up using groundwater for their supply, and they're small, especially transient systems operate very much like a private system, so they're comparable, and they also have similar problems with operation. We've all heard the adage, community water supplies are in the business of providing water. Non-community systems, they're in some other business, and they're just required by law to also provide safe water. So understanding proper care and why it's important, and some of those things are very relevant, both for a private well owner who's drinking their water and also for non-community systems. Next slide. So some background here. 2 years ago, when EPA put out their RFA for, there were 3 NPA national priority areas, assistance areas. The third one was for wastewater, both centralized and decentralized, and private wells, and that was the first time that EPA had funded any private well work. Well, RCAP got that grant, and we've been working with RCAP through smallwatersupply.org, and we were fortunate enough that we got involved with this private well work in developing this class. And the State Water Survey, we're the only, well, I guess there's one in Oklahoma now too, but Illinois is the only state that has both a geological survey and a water survey. And our job here is related to private wells and groundwater resources. And that's, working with private well owners is what we do. So it was a good fit, and that's how we got involved. The program required a way to reach nationally private well owners, which is a really tall order. So it's accessible and has measurable outcomes in the grant. And so the approach we took, there's a lot of great information already available, either through state health departments or federal agencies, extension. A lot of different organizations have provided resources. Can you go back? This, I apologize, this might be on a time, shouldn't be, but anyway, so we decided to create a start-to-finish program that really taught people how to understand their well, how it works, why it works, and those sorts of things, and then put that online and push the information to them so that it was easy for them to access the information. Next slide. So the 10 lessons really start out with really basic, the hydrologic cycle, how water flows through the ground, how it gets in your well, goes through the different types of well construction, all the infrastructure on your system as far as pressure tanks, and even problems like why your pump might be cycling on and off, common problems that well owners have, all the way up through testing and sampling, and if you need treatment, some things you need to consider. So it's meant to be a comprehensive but basic class on these are the things you need to know if you're going to be a good steward and manage your well and your resource properly. Next slide. This is the front page of our website. It's just privatewellclass.org. You can see we have an email address where people can email us with questions. They can also call us with questions. It's really simple. You click on where it says click here. It asks you your first name, your email address, and what state or territory you live in. And you click sign up, and it sends you the first lesson. And then you get one lesson a week for 10 weeks, emailed to you in a newsletter style. Next slide. And then it provides, this is the first lesson. As you can see, it looks like a newsletter. There's a pre-test at the beginning. The idea being, well, our take on this was to provide questions that pique people's interest and also tried to tell them some of the things that they might not know that they think they know about their well. And then again, the first lesson is really about the science of groundwater, how water moves through the ground, and with each one it tells you why the lesson's important and what you really need to get out of it. Next slide. And again, we used resources from we used nearly 100 different resources, both federal, state, and almost all publicly available, but almost all public entities that had, kind of the best diagrams, the most simple to understand. Like this diagram talks about water flowing through porous media. As working with well owners, you hear stories. We had a guy tell us he knows his well's connected to Lake Michigan because he can still smell fish sometimes when he pumps the water too much. It's a 200-foot well in bedrock that's 100 miles from Lake Michigan. People just don't understand in a lot of cases. And so this is meant to be, it's written in first person, like we're talking to a well owner, and it takes them through how water flows through and the different types of geologic material and all those things. Next slide. So the goal of all this is really to teach well owners three things: why their well is important, why they need to know how it works and what the problems might be, and then how they can use that information to help protect themselves from risk. And it's unbiased. We come from the standpoint of not playing any favorites with any particular type of organization or objective. It's just meant to be, here's what the facts are, here's what you need to know. Next slide. And our personal, if you will, goal is about these things. We want to, when they're done with the class, we want a well owner to understand their log and where their water's coming from. So not only how deep or the pump setting or if it's got a screen, but what that means. So are there naturally occurring contaminants? What are the water quality issues? And the way to go about doing that really is to understand your local sources of information, local experts. And actually one of our lessons is just about finding information locally. We can't provide great information about the entire country. And so our approach is to provide the basic information that everybody needs and then try to get them to reach out to their local experts and local sources of information so that they can get the best information available for them. And then of course, more than half of well owners have never sampled their well ever. And one of the things we really preach and try to get through is that you, as a private well owner anyway, you need to sample your well once a year. And obviously there are differences for a non-community system, which I'll get into at the end. Next slide. So the pre-test I mentioned, so this is, I can't remember when I took this screenshot, but I spliced this together. At the time, we had 2,180 or so people who'd taken the pre-test. And again, the idea, what's a pitless adapter? Only 45% knew what that was. No, not everywhere in the country do you have pitless adapters, that's for sure. But the second question gets at water quality. 10 ppb is micrograms per liter. And so if we had 0.001 milligrams per liter, what's that equivalent to? 39% of well owners knew how to convert that or knew what the right answer was. And so in one of the lessons, it has a chart that shows those differences and how to convert from one to the other. In a lot of cases, you might report things in parts per million versus parts per billion, and it's understanding, especially like for arsenic, if you see a part per million result, it may look like it's pretty benign, if you will, because all the talk is about 10 ppb. And so understanding that difference is really important. Next slide. Along with each lesson, at the end of each lesson, there's a link back to this resources page on our website. And the idea here is we've used a lot of resources to put this together. 8 to 15 or so resources for each lesson. And so you can go to this page and click on these different links. And we encourage people, one of the things we encourage in our post-test and evaluation is that they go through a lot of these other resources. You can see how things, someone else's view, if you will. I wrote the lessons for the private well class. Maybe that approach didn't get through to everybody, and this way you can look at some other information and hopefully gain more understanding of those issues that are important to you. Next slide. So here's where we're at. We've had over 3,200 people sign up for the class in about 18 months, and about 10% have done our evaluation at the end and asked, what do you like, what you didn't like, what would you change, those sorts of things. 75 of those have been sanitarians or health professionals, and these are important folks because at least in some states, they're the folks out there evaluating the private well when it's being drilled, or approving the permit, or doing the initial sampling. It depends on how that works in every state, I realize, but they're the ones working a lot with well owners and really need to understand that. We've had a lot of other folks take the class, water operators, wastewater operators, conservation area people, a lot of, basically non-community operators. Some have already taken our class, and so it's been pretty well-rounded. It's more than just private well owners. Next slide. And so of the 75 sanitarians, I just pulled the last 8 at the top here that have responded. What do you like most about the class? It's been very well accepted. Out of the 317, I think 314 have said they would recommend the class. And yeah, that's fine. Moving on to the next slide, what would you change? By far it's nothing. Everyone seems to really like it. The second thing there says links to resources in all 50 states. We're actually working on that as part of our current grant. And the quizzes thing, there are sanitarians who've asked to have CEUs available for that sort of product at the end when they complete the class. Next slide. So where we're at today, we have another year of funding through RCAP with EPA. And so, we're maintaining the lessons, trying to improve those. When new things come out, we haven't done it yet, but we plan to include, one of the lessons talks a little bit about septic systems. We plan to include Septic Smart as one of the resources there and mention it in the text. We had a number of people who did the evaluation say they would like to see videos because they don't like to read, which, as sad as that is for those of us that are a little older, that's the way the world is these days. And so we're developing both video lessons and some podcast audio lessons of some of the more relevant materials. And originally we were going to do 10 videos, one for each lesson, but I think we stepped back and decided we're going to cut smaller pieces and make 3 to 5 minute videos and probably make more like 25 or 30. When we did the webinars the first year for the class, one of the things we realized is that more people got on the webinars to ask questions than to hear the material we were providing. And so this year we're hosting 6 Q&A webinars. We send out a blurb that we're going to host a webinar on a particular topic. We give people 2 or 3 weeks to submit questions to us. Then we answer those questions on the webinar. We bring in drillers or chemists, whoever we need to help answer those questions, and then also try to answer any questions that are live as we do those. We've had 3 already. We're working with a PhD student from Columbia here at the U of I who's converted one of our webinars into Spanish, and we hope to present that both in Puerto Rico and whoever else is interested later this next spring. We are developing a contact list, as I mentioned. Our goal there is to provide local resources, at least at the state and territory level and for tribes, so that folks can have a front and back PDF or printout of who they can contact in their area for different types of resources, whether it be a geologic log, water quality information, sampling, those sorts of things. We maintain the web page, and there's an email and hotline I mentioned. And one of the other things, RCAP is hosting 30 workshops nationwide. I don't know which 30 states those are in, or territories. We'd have to ask RCAP or ask your state RCAP person if they're planning to host one. Those should be mostly this spring and early summer, and they'll be live. I mean, there'll be a venue. They'll advertise, and they'll have well owners can come in for that. And they're trying to find both. We'll present something here through a webinar, and there'll also be live a person locally who is either a driller or from a health department or that sort of thing to help out too. Next slide. So I want to mention, the 13 million private wells in use in the United States, and so there's far more need and work that needs to be done to help folks realize the importance of their private well, not only for their own health protection, but also for source water protection, risk from abandoned wells, those sorts of things. And there are a number of other organizations that are doing similar work. The National Groundwater Association has a site, wellowner.org, that provides some basic information. NEHA is the National Environmental Health Association. That's the organization for all the sanitarians and local health department folks. Water Systems Council, and then Co-op Extension, and especially in rural areas, they, in Illinois, there's one in every county. Depends on the state. 5 states have a Master Well Owner Network program where they train folks who have a well to be a Master Well Owner, similar to the Master Gardener program, if you're familiar with that, to go out and then help other well owners in their area. And I know in Pennsylvania they've helped in the last 20 years over 40,000 well owners through that program. So I just wanted to mention there are a lot of resources out there with information for well owners. It's knowing, getting folks interested in actually trying to learn more about their well. Everyone seems to think their groundwater is safe and it's good enough. So next slide. And going back, we're here talking about non-community systems. This class really provides a good basic understanding for operation and maintenance. A lot of non-community systems are summer camps or daycares or a church out in the country, those sorts of things. And so this gives them not only some basic operational knowledge and why they need to be concerned about source water protection and those issues, and knowing how deep their well is and why that matters, and if it's in a rural area, an agricultural area, a sand point, for instance, is certainly not a safe well, but also to understand why they need to monitor and why source water protection is so important. Obviously, there'll be differences based on state regs for collecting samples and those sorts of things, or what to do in an emergency situation that are different than what we teach in the class. But in a lot of ways, there's a lot of good information here that will benefit non-community systems, which is why, again, I think I was asked to be on the call. We do hope long-term to be able to develop a few lessons that are more relevant for non-community systems that could either be an add-on or a separate class, if you will, for non-community systems, but we're still working on that. So next slide. And I'll take any questions.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much. As you pointed out, there are 13 million private wells out there, and it's been impressive that you've had quite a few people taking your private well class. What plans do you have to do even further outreach to make people aware that these lessons are available, and then to make them available to people? What kind of more marketing and outreach are you going to be able to do to get this out there to those who need it?
Well, really what it comes down to and what we've learned is that advertising is really the problem. There's not enough advertising of this information available, both for us and for other groups like, NGWA and some of the others. So we do hope to do a lot more outreach. When we started this class, we made a list of all the state agencies that either regulate drillers or well construction, all the health departments in each state, and the extension state offices, and we just called everybody and said, we have this class we've developed. You know, some were skeptical. They said, you know, what does someone in Illinois know about groundwater in New York? Well, a lot of it's very similar. It's glacial in a lot of cases, or the bedrock's very similar. We don't use granite wells in Illinois, but, you know, there's a few things that are different. But in a lot of cases, many things are the same. And we tried to structure this class so that it's relevant for everyone. And so over time, by doing that, we've built up a list of maybe 70 or 80 agencies that all host a link on their website. And as well owners find that information, they're signing up. We're probably getting still 20 or 30 a week without doing any extra marketing. But as this current project goes on and we develop some of these new materials, you know, we plan to make all those phone calls again. And you know, personal communication is the best way to get a hold of the agencies or the folks that are actually working with local well owners. And so that's what we hope to do. And if there are people we've missed, or there's a partners page on our website that provides a way to download, you know, the button that you can put on your web page to tell people that, you know, this class exists, those sorts of things. If anyone's got any suggestions or needs more information, they can certainly contact us through the website as well.
Okay, great. Maybe one final question. There are a couple other questions, but we'll just finish with one here. Can you get access to all 10 lessons at once?
You know, that's I guess the best answer there is, you know, unfortunately we rely on grant funding for this project, and the way this was set up initially was to be a online self-paced sort of approach. And if we just provide all the lessons as a PDF, if you will, or however, then we won't be able to track who's using it and some of those things. And so unfortunately, we're discouraging providing, you know, the entire set of 10 lessons. One, people are more likely to actually go through the lessons if they get them one a week. If you give them the entire book, they're going to wait till they have a problem, and they're going to thumb through and find that issue, and that's all they're going to do. And the idea here is this is meant to be a class that teaches you how to be a better steward of your well and your source water, not a manual that you can put on the shelf and use whenever you have a problem. And so we don't plan to make the lessons available as one unit, except in the case, working in Illinois specifically with our extension, some of the times when we've hosted webinars, they've actually put a blurb in their newsletter and offered to have a viewing of the webinar at their office for folks that don't have fast internet or are older and just don't use the internet that much. And so I know in Champaign County, for one of our webinars, they had 10 or 12 people show up, and for those folks, we provide a paper manual, but we would probably print it and send it to them, not just put out a PDF. And that's, if anybody's got thoughts on that, on how to keep this funded and do it a different way, I'd certainly welcome them.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve. If we have time at the very end here, we'll continue with some additional questions. But you did have a lot of interest on that, and people, if they have ideas, suggestions, whatever for you, or further questions, they can feel free to put that in the chat box or the question box, and we'll pass all that information on to you, to Steve, after the webinar. So our last speaker today is Vern Steel, who's with the Rural Water Association of Utah. Vern is the Chief Financial Officer and the Deputy Executive Director for the association. While working for Utah Rural Water, Vern has held the positions of Publication Specialist and Computer Tech. He's worked one-on-one with many small systems on computer-related issues. And Vern is a certified Level 4 operator in water distribution and water treatment. So welcome to the webinar, Vern.
Thank you. I think hopefully everyone can hear me now.
You sound good on this end.
Great. So I'm pretty excited about this. I love technology. I love the things that we can do with new technology, and this this is a kind of a fun application. I think it's kind of solved some problems that we've had to deal with. Kind of a history of how we came up with this. About 2 years ago, just exactly 2 years ago, in fact, we were looking for a solution at the national level on how to more accurately track our field technicians' logs and to be able to verify that they, that they're at where they say they're at. And we kind of came up with this idea of trying to find a mobile app where you could use a GPS ping to kind of verify that these guys were where they said they were at. And instead of kind of trying to reinvent the wheel, we first started searching to see if we could find something that already existed out there that would work for us. And we found 3 or 4 companies that had something kind of close, but we ended up finding this company called Canvas. It's actually gocanvas.com on their website. But they provide these series of mobile apps that allow you to collect data. Pretty much any data that you collect in paper form, you can use this mobile app to collect by quickly creating a specific app for that, whatever that form or whatever that data might be. And so National Rural Water Association can put together an agreement with Canvas at that point in time to try to offer this to system operators and systems and be able to use this technology. Ultimately, National Rural Water chose to kind of develop their own app for that logs issue that I previously mentioned, but the data collection forms still exist as a viable option to many operators, and we definitely use it in Utah. Should we go to the next slide, please? So what are mobile apps? The Canvas mobile apps, they work on the Android system, they work on the iOS, and they also work on Windows devices. And what they do, as I previously mentioned, they allow the user to collect data in the field on their smartphone or on their tablet or any other device. And you don't actually have to be connected to the internet or connected to cell service at the time when you're collecting the data. Because of the way the mobile app works, you can collect that data on your device, and then when you do have an internet connection, then you can upload that information. And virtually any form that you previously collected on paper can be collected this way. Next slide, please. A couple of really successful uses that we came up for this in Utah, and these would be our field technicians who travel around the state and assist water and wastewater operators, both in training on things that they work on, but also in technical assistance. On the wastewater side, one form that we use quite a bit is this lagoon inspection form, which allows our wastewater tech to help these lagoon operators submit their lagoon information. On the water side, our IPS deficiency correction form is one that's been really successful, and that's the one I'm going to focus on to kind of show you guys how it works. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the IPS report, and this is a report. IPS is Improvement Priority System, but this is a report that the Division of Drinking Water in Utah puts together. It's very similar to the ETT list that EPA uses. Basically, this gives demerit points for significant deficiencies or other deficiencies that are found in a water system when a sanitary survey is performed. And then in order to correct those deficiencies, then you have to fix the deficiency, then you have to show to the Division of Drinking Water that you've done so. And that's what we use this app for. Next slide, please. What we're looking at here is you can go online and find this deficiency correction form on the Division of Drinking Water's website. And there is a lot of ability to send this information in electronically, but sometimes it can be a little cumbersome because you have to collect the data in different methods and then try to combine it all and then get it sent in. And not always do these Adobe forms work with every email system. So this Canvas app allows us to kind of do everything a little bit smoother, a little bit more all-in-one. So let's go on to the next slide. and we'll kind of go through how the app itself works. What we're looking at right here is a login screen when you open up the app. And if you tell it to save your information, it will kind of keep you logged in for about 30 days before you have to re-log in. I mentioned before you don't have to be online or have cell coverage when you collect this data. However, you do need to be online when you log in so that it'll open up the app. Let's go to the next slide. What we're looking at here, after you open up the app, it shows you all of the different data collection apps that you have previously created. And so you can see that there's a number of different ones that we use. But we're going to look at this IPS deficiency correction form. And so what you would do is you'd just tap on that icon right there where it says IPS deficiency. Moving on to the next slide, this is what the first screen comes up with. And it's pretty straightforward. All of the fields that we see in here are going to be the same fields that are on the form created by our Division of Drinking Water. All of the required fields that they need are on this application. The first thing we do, though, because we use this with our field staff to help these operators send this in, and we'd like to put the name of our Rural Water Association of Utah staff member who's helping them. And then you'll see on here, it's got a red star by a number of the data collection points. Everything with a red star is required information. It has to be collected or you can't move forward. So you can see we've got the name of the system, we've got the system ID, the facility ID, and the facility ID and the deficiency code, they come directly from that IPS report that shows what the deficiency is that we're trying to correct. Let's go to the next slide. And this is just a continuation of the first screen here. In this case, the deficiency was that there was no smooth nose sampling tap, and we installed a smooth nose sampling tap. So then when you're running the app, you need to hit this next button. In our case, we're just going to go to the next slide. And then the next place, you have an option to add photos, take a picture of the correction. And we've added in here the option to take 3 different pictures. You don't have to take 3. You can see in this slide here that it says image captured. When I was putting this together, I captured an image and put it in there. But you can either literally take a picture at that moment, or you can add a picture that you previously took of the correction. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, and then what we're going to have here is the name of the operator for the system and the email for the operator for the system. I put my email address in here, but we would want the operator's email in here because this is actually coming from the operator. It has today's date, the day that we're submitting this, and then the text at the bottom is standard text that will appear on the report that goes into the Division of Drinking Water. Let's go to the next slide. And then the next step is we capture the signature of the operator, kind of another step of proof that it was the operator who did this work. Let's go on to the next one. And then in this screen, it automatically goes to the default email at the Division of Drinking Water, as well as the rules operator who takes care of this, and the email of the operator who filled this out also gets a copy of it. And additionally, you can put in anybody else that you want to receive a copy of this. That's where you'd add those. Let's go to the next slide. At this point, we're finished, and you can see on this screen it says 1 submission to be sent under there. So you click on the yellow box, and then what it does is it reaches out to the server as long as you have, at this point, cell phone coverage or Wi-Fi, and then it uploads this data. And so then the email would automatically send to the Division of Drinking Water, and they would have all of the information that they need to correct this. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so what we're looking at now is the PDF report that the Division of Drinking Water receives, and you can see it has all of that information in a nice format. And let's go on to the next slide, the second picture. Let's go one more slide. And then you can see at the bottom the operator's information as well as the signature collected here. This is kind of nice in a couple of ways where everything that's required is all encompassed in this one PDF document. Additionally, I know that at our Division of Drinking Water, they're trying to do everything as much as possible paperless. And so this gives it to them in a paperless format that they can file away without have to go in and scan different documents and combine everything on their end. Let's go to the next slide as well. Okay, so that's kind of how the app works. Where you get the mobile app, we're going to kind of go through a few screens really quickly here. This partnership is through the National Rural Water Association and the Canvas company. You can go directly to the Canvas company and download it, but then you would not have access to all of the forms that have already been built by the National Rural Water Association. So let's go to the next slide. So if you go to the National Rural Water website at their main site and you scroll down to the bottom, you see on here where you click on the NRWA mobile apps. Let's go to the next slide. At this point, you can see a video demo of how it works. And then if you click on the Try It Free button, it takes you over to the Canvas website. Let's go to the next slide. At this point, I know there's several clicks, but you click on the Try Canvas Free button here, and what you do is then you set up your 30-day free trial, because there is a cost involved with this app. It is unfortunately not a free app, so you get a 30-day free trial to see if it works for you. Let's go on to the next slide. And then once you do have an account set up, this is kind of what your screen looks like. What you do is you create all of the data collection forms that you want to use through their website, and this is kind of your dashboard that you're looking at. And there's a number of different things you can do. Let's go on to the next slide. You can see this is where all of the different collection forms that we have created in Utah are stored. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, this is looking inside that IPS deficiency correction form. This is the inner workings, and it's really quite easy. It's really simply a matter of drag and drop to add new fields that you want to collect the data for. And then once you're done dragging and dropping everything you want on there, then you save it and then you publish it, which means it's then sent out to all of the users on your system. Let's go to the next slide. And then one additional nice thing is for each form, each data collection form that you create, it automatically stores a copy of everything on their server so that you can go in afterwards if somehow you lost that email where it came in, and you can look it up there. You can also create a report in an Excel format and put all of that data in an Excel format so you can use it for other purposes as well. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so that's kind of the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know I really rushed through that, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Okay, thank you, Vern. I have a couple, well, I guess one question here is just generally if you can elaborate a little bit more on what the cost of the app is. I know there's a free trial period and all that, but then what's the cost, how is it determined, and just generally what is the range of the cost? Okay. Let's see, I believe the cost is typically an annual cost, and the cost is per user. And so I guess it kind of depends. If you have multiple users in your system, then you could probably work out kind of a bulk pricing through the Canvas company themselves. But I guess we can probably just say it's about $200 a year per user. Okay. Another question here is, are other rural water affiliates in other states, are they using this app or similar apps, or is Utah unique in that way? I would say we're unique in working with our primacy agency specifically in submitting some of these things. The apps that I specifically talked about today, I created on our end. So other state associations may not have those, although they would have access to them if they express the interest in them. But they all do have access to these apps, to this software, and as I mentioned before, any data collection could be accomplished through this. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much, Vern. I think that's pretty much the questions there. We had a couple other questions for other speakers, but I was thinking maybe what we can do is just to wrap this up here in the last few minutes here, we could have kind of an online demo from from Curtis on the the Idaho switchboard. Curtis, are you available to do that?
Yeah.
So Idaho has developed kind of a very handy-dandy, very practical sort of a site that has lots of information that's useful to public water systems. And I thought maybe he could just spend just a couple minutes to show that too, just an additional resource and additional idea as to how states can set up resources that public water systems can get access to directly and then use it to download forms and to submit information and that sort of thing. So I don't know, Jess, is that something that we can do? Jess is going to try to get it set up here so that we can share Curtis's desktop, and I think there we are.
You can see that?
Okay, so Curtis, you want to just mention a few things on that site there?
Sure. This is our public water system switchboard. This is the switchboard that the public can see. The one that I was showing you before was our internal switchboard. This is a one-stop shop for our operators, for them to go to for most of the information that they're going to need to operate their system or help them operate their system and stay in compliance. Some of the cool tools that we have is like our monitoring schedule. We click on that. And we choose one of the systems. Just put in use current year. That's going to show their monitoring schedule for the current year. And we also have, for budgeting purposes, for them to look at 3-year and 9-year schedules as well. It shows for total coliform that they've got a monthly sample for City of Aberdeen. They've got a nitrate sample that's due this year for well number 1. It's been satisfied already. You can see that on the right-hand side here. And well number 2, nitrate, again, they've satisfied that sample. So it looks like everything has been satisfied for Aberdeen for this year. If it wasn't, it would say no. And the queries that we have that produce this information, this is the same information that we use to produce the auto dialer call list. If it were to say no here, then we'd pull that information and call that system to let them know that they're missing samples. Provide a friendly reminder. So if we go back to the switchboard, we also have lab forms that the public water system can look at or use to generate and it's pulling or producing the lab forms based on the schedules that we have in CIDWIS. The big benefit that we found to doing this is that a lot of times a system will just go in and on the lab sample form, those put from well. Well, we don't know whether it's from well number 1, 2, 3, or 4. And when we are actually generating the data from our database, we get lab forms that are filled out correctly. Since these are all satisfied, I don't think we're going to be able to generate lab forms from here. Yeah, that's why it's not letting me. It's because they're already satisfied. We'd have to pick a different system. I'm going to show you, our how to sample videos. This is for water sampling for total coliform. This takes you directly to a YouTube video that we found. It's an AWWA coliform sampling video that then the system can watch to see how to properly take a sample. So like I said, this application is a nice one-stop shop for systems to be able to go and get all the information that they need to help them operate their system in a one location. Important dates, tells the system. Information of when their CCRs are due, monitoring schedules, waivers, when we look at those. So it kind of gives them an outline of when they can, what they can expect during certain months of the year. So these are beneficial information. Is there any other specific questions you want to, or different buttons you want to look at?
Okay, well, I think that's a good intro. I appreciate your walking through those. Certainly those are very practical examples, and I know there's a lot more power behind it, so people can make note of the, what is the web address for that, the link?
Yeah, it's going to be, if you just go on our website, our DEQ website, and going to the water quality, and then go to drinking water, you'll see the PWS switchboard right there. So if you just go to Idaho DEQ and get on our website, you can go into the water quality, drinking water, and then it's the PWS switchboard right there that you can then peruse the different applications and buttons that we have there for our switchboard.
Okay, great, great. Okay, well, thank you very, very much. I think we're going to start to wrap it up here. We've got a lot of good questions. There are still several that we couldn't get to, but we're reaching the end of our time. But our purpose was to give states a sampler of the different types of tools and resources that are out there that are taking advantage of technology, ways to reach systems more easily, getting better outreach, improving communication, making more efficient use of their staff, that sort of thing. So I hope that people in the audience have been inspired and that they can follow up on some of these things. And I really want to give a big thank you to all of our speakers. We had some excellent presentations, excellent work that you've done in developing these technologies. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for sharing your story. As I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is being recorded, and soon we'll be able to post it up on the ASDWA website, and you can see the address for that site there on the screen. The previous two webinars are up there already. This one will be up there shortly in a couple weeks. So as I mentioned earlier, if you didn't receive the slides for today's webinar, make sure you submit that to us in the question box or send me an email. Or if you have any other questions, send me an email and we'll be glad to help you out. So once again, thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the audience. We appreciate everybody's participation and we wish you a good afternoon.